The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said to his disciples, "Beware of false prophets who come to you disguised as sheep, but underneath are ravenous wolves. You will be able to tell them by their fruits. Can people pick grapes from thorns or figs from thistles? In the same way, a sound tree produces good fruit, but a rotten tree bad fruit. A sound tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor a rotten tree bear good fruit. Any tree that does not produce good fruit is cut down and thrown on the fire. I repeat, you will be able to tell them by their fruits." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
We have just been listening to the Lord's warning earlier in this Sermon on the Mount regarding passing judgment. That is one degree further on, however, placing one's seat in the judgment seat of the Lord Himself. That we cannot do, but permission is given here to do one thing which it is very wise to do, just to observe and to start precisely by the fruits. And then reasonably one can calculate, as a doctor will, from the symptoms one can make a diagnosis, without entering into the moral state exactly of the soul, for we do not know, and that is to go into judgment. We can nevertheless have some inkling of what may be going on. This Gospel falls well on the feast of two great bishops and one great layman. Care for the sheep, and also being able to warn the sheep about ravenous wolves dressed in sheep's clothing. The first is early in time and in contact with some of the great names of his time. Paulinus Paulinus. He was a brilliant layperson, not even initially a Christian. According to his disciple Uranius and the calendar of St. Jerome, this would be his feast day corresponding to his dies natalis, the birthday, that is, the day of his birthday into heaven. Born at Bordeaux, so a Frenchman, of a Roman senatorial family, and well trained in rhetoric and poetry, and that comes through. He spent 20 years in political life. He travelled extensively in France, Spain and Italy. Now these are big distances on foot or horseback. And in 381 he became governor of Campania in the south of Italy. That's not too far from Naples. Returning to France after the victory of the Goths at Adrianopolis, he married the Spanish lady Teresia, who shared with him her ideal of living a strictly, now gospel-like life. It's interesting, but this will continue as we see. They came into contact with some of the most important persons of the time, the great Martin himself, Martin de Tours, and St. Ambrose. These are big figures. In 389, Paulinus was baptized, so it's close to the baptismal time of Augustine, and he gets to know Augustine by epistolary contact as well, and moved to Spain. After the death of his only child, Celsus, he gave away all of his patrimony and embraced a monastic style of life. It is interesting that his wife followed him in this. A very interesting phenomenon indeed, this one. Under pressure from the people, he was ordained a priest at Barcelona in 394, but he then retired to Nola, near Naples, close to the shrine of St. Felix. So this is going to be important in his life, this saint, and founded a small monastic community. Together with his wife, both of whom now lived a life of celibacy, he set up a hospice for the sick and for pilgrims to the shrine of this great saint of the area, Felix. In 409, he was called by the people to be Bishop of Nola. What has come through is that he was one who ruled with wisdom and generosity. It comes through in the liturgical prayers that he really was an example of pastoral care. He died at the age of 76 at Nola, having served for 20 years as its bishop. His relics were transferred to Rome, but were restored to Nola by Pope Pius X in 1909. Now, this cross-fertilization between countries in the Mediterranean basin is interesting. Going as far as North Africa, of course, this contact was through Latin. North Africa worked in Latin. So we have these letters going around between the great voices of the time. We have this vast correspondence with well-known personages of his day, including St. Augustine of Hippo. Now, in his letter to Alypius, who was an important person in the life of St. Augustine, Bishop of Tagaste and friend precisely of St. Augustine, which is contained in the Office of Readings, he expresses his friendship and sends a gift. We have sent to you a loaf of bread in token of our unity. It symbolizes as well the substance of the Trinity. By accepting it, you will make it a bread of blessing. Now, that is somewhat Oriental in style, the eulogia. And by the way, the residue of something similar is to be found even in the Mass of the Roman Rite. We still put in this commingling of the consecrated bread and wine there. That goes back to the early church. Initially it was the bishop who would be the celebrant. As time went on, it was more and more the priests, but the bishop was present in them, and that would be a sign of union with the bishop. This would be, as far as I know, it would be one part of the bishop's celebration which would be taken to the other celebrations. So that is one interesting case of a bishop who was faithful to the end and called unexpectedly, given his political career and also his marital state. Interesting too that they were able to consecrate themselves in parallel and support each other in this monastic adventure, and they were very much intertwined in soul, because even before his baptism there was that common sharing of an ideal. Blessed are those who have someone of that nature all through the life journey of the soul unto eternity, two souls who hold each other up. We have it in the life of St. Norbert with regard to St. Evermode. In his life it says Norbert used to lean his soul upon Evermode. Now, the other is later in time and important for us in Britain. First of all, John Fisher. He was born in Yorkshire and was ordained a priest at the age of 25 after a brilliant career at Cambridge. He distinguished himself by combating the Protestant heresies and especially the theses proposed by Martin Luther. At the age of 35, while remaining Chancellor at Cambridge, he became Bishop of Rochester. He was confessor to the mother of Henry VIII, that's Elizabeth of York, and was renowned for his humanistic as well as his theological learning. He was a friend of Erasmus of Rotterdam, to whom he gave a chair at Christ's College at Cambridge. And Erasmus said of him, "There is not a man more cultured, more admired, or more holy." Fisher's episcopal residence was like a monastery because of its austerity and the daily liturgy of the hours, as well as the discipline of the domestics. Because he defended the validity of the true marriage of Henry VIII, he was imprisoned for the first time in 1533. Later he was interned in the Tower of London because he refused to take the oath of loyalty after the king married Anne Boleyn and rejected papal authority over the church in England. Now, this was an important moment also for our fathers in the Carthusian order. They were caught up in it. They saw the dangers. Already not to realize that this marriage was a true marriage, and to tamper with the consequences politically was extremely insidious. But then, of course, when it became more clear that the church was going into schism through this new supremacy, that of the king, it became very much a question then of martyrdom. And they initially were confused, wanting knowledge, and they celebrated the Mass of the Holy Ghost. And they had had this unusual experience of the tongues of fire appearing over their heads. So they were given wisdom, and they were the proto-martyrs. The Carthusian martyrs were the first, and they had a terrible martyrdom, first of the Protestant Reformation in England. And so there we were, and of course this is close in time, as we'll now see. He was beheaded a month after Pope Paul III had named him a cardinal when he was in prison. The other, of course, is the great Chancellor himself, Thomas More. He was born in London, at the house of Chelsea. I think it's still in Catholic hands actually, and studied at Oxford and in London. He was twice married. Now that's because the first wife died fairly young and he had to have someone to look after the household, and was a member of Parliament, together with Pico della Mirandola, whose biography More had written in 1494, and Erasmus, who was More's close friend. More was an outstanding humanist. Now this friendship between Erasmus and Thomas More comes through also in writing. We have Erasmus's famous Praise of Folly. The Praise of Folly is a play on words in its Greek title. Morie encomium, because the encomium of fools, of Moria, is a play on the name of More, but it's actually a clever way of admiring him. He's a great admirer, using very clever means to show it. And he also, More himself, uses the same technique in writing the great Utopia, nowhere, utos, topos, utopos, there's no place, utopos, there's no place, therefore it's a bizarre way of trying to say what we should be like through literary devices. It's based on what society would be if it were just founded on natural virtues. Eventually, More himself became Chancellor, succeeding, of course, Cardinal Wolsey, who is known to have gone down in disgrace with these words: "If only I had served my God, as well as I had served my King." And of course, More was very careful in what he said and didn't say. Eventually, of course, he had to say. But he was known to be opposed to the king's divorce, and after 3 years he resigned as Chancellor and refused to recognize the king's spiritual supremacy. So they were trying to put some clause there for the sake of his conscience and people like him, and they wanted this bit added in: as far as the law of Christ will allow. The supreme head of the church in England was the king. Of course, he maintained that the law of Christ did not allow in any measure that that be the case. Temporal supremacy was one thing, spiritual supremacy was quite another. And of course, given the climate of the time with the Lutheran rebellion in Europe, the consequences could already be seen. Once there is that disconnection with the foundation of unity, Rome, well, there's no limit to what will follow. So although Henry VIII was not really so much a heretic, he was going into schism, and this was going later on to open the door to heresy, because the point of security is no longer there. Peter. So he himself, from his cell in the Tower of London, peeped through at the Carthusians going on the hurdle. That's some kind of cart without wheels, torn through the streets of London by these horses, bump, 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 on the ground, just with that plank between them and the ground, up to the Tyburn Hill, and then the maximum, being hanged and then taken down while alive, drawn, that is, having all the entrails removed, all the entrails, not one spare. And the last of all is the heart. And then that famous phrase, the executioner holds up the heart, behold, the heart of a traitor. They all have to reply, God, long live the king. It was the punishment for high treason. And that awful punishment nevertheless did not deter the Carthusians from growing with joy, and he saw that on their faces as he looked through his cell and said to his daughter Meg, look how they go as bridegrooms to the wedding feast. Now in his last letter to that same Meg, his dear daughter, he does indicate how there is a certain human nervousness coming in because he knows how atrocious this is going to be, and he's praying for strength. Of course, what happens eventually is that the king gives a special benefit to Thomas More, and this message comes through because of the fact that you're a friend of the king. He is giving you this special privilege of not having only the beheading. And of course his calm answer is, God protect the friends of the king from such a favour. And he goes to the block, but not without that same little twinkle of English wit coming out. He says to his executioner, look, good sir, to thy reputation. Have thought for my beard, for it hath done none harm. My beard is long, and my neck is short. And off he went with a twinkle in his eye, and gained very quickly the crown of glory. With regard to their importance, it's something that we need to take into account in our day. John Fisher witnessed to and defended the faith, and he declared that royal marriage could not be dissolved by any power on earth or in heaven. He asserted that he was willing to give his life in defense of this teaching, as did John the Baptist. And of course, this is the vigil of the Feast of St. John the Baptist this very evening, because of the anticipation of the feast, because of the Feast of the Sacred Heart the following day, this year. And he died on this very day, the 22nd of July. Thomas More died a few days later on the 6th of July. So this is that he died on this day, the 22nd of June, and he was followed on the 6th of July by Thomas More. His martyrdom was like a liturgy of the word. He first read the passage from John chapter 17, verse 3, and then said to the people, I have come here to die for the faith of the Catholic Church and of Christ. He then recited the Te Deum and Psalm 30, which of course talks in this vein, into your hands I commend my spirit, recognizing there the union with Calvary. To the end, he was concerned about the bishops who would yield to the king. And he said somewhat bitterly, courage has been betrayed by those who should have defended it. What would he say today? Thomas More, who was described by Pope Pius XI as a truly complete man, considered himself unworthy of martyrdom and feared for his weakness, as he wrote to his daughter Margaret, although I know well, Margaret, that because of my past wickedness I deserve to be abandoned by God, I cannot but trust in his merciful goodness. I will not mistrust him, Meg, though I shall feel myself weakening and on the verge of being overcome with fear. Nonetheless, he was able to meet death with a smile and a humorous remark on his lips. Ladies, pray for England and also for the Church at large, that we may have courageous pastors able to speak out and not cowed by fear, for whatever reason whatsoever. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae.